Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, what were the big takeaways from the 2025 elections in Virginia, New Jersey, California, and beyond, and what does it mean for the midterm elections? And also, what's next after a handful of Senate Democrats crossed the aisle to end the government shutdown? We'll take a deep dive with Leah Askarinam of the Associated Press. Buckle up. I'm Jacob Rubashkin, Deputy Editor of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan political analysis for more than 40 years. And I spent this weekend in Washington, D.C., which of course does not have a congressional district itself or voting congressional representation. That has not stopped a very pitched primary from brewing for the D.C. delegate seat currently held by longtime Democrat Eleanor Holmes Norton.
And I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. And this weekend, I'm planning to go to Richmond in Virginia's 4th District to see the band Action Adventure play. I'm not sure that Democratic Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan will be there, but if she is, that would be a pleasant surprise.
Would she get a free 6-month subscription to Inside Elections if she runs into you at the mosh pit?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe even 8 months.
Wow.
With that dedication to the cause. Yeah. Congresswoman, if you're there, let's make sure that we connect.
We'll get this to her. Don't worry. Before we get into our main stories of the day, Nathan, what are some headlines that people should not miss?
There are a ton, but we'll narrow it down. Democratic Congressman Jared Golden is not seeking re-election in Maine's 2nd District, making it extremely difficult for Democrats to hold the most Republican seat that is currently held by a Democrat in the House. The 2nd District voted for Donald Trump in 3 straight elections. The margins were 9.6 points and 9 points again. Republicans have a credible challenger with former Governor Paul LePage, who has consistently carried this district in his statewide wins. We changed our rating from tilt Democratic all the way to likely Republican. Democrats can't afford to lose very many of their own seats if they want to win back the majority.
Yeah, and a good example of how candidates really do matter. One candidate dropping out of the race can be a huge shift. And my apologies to Scranton Mayor Paige Cognetti, whose interview I interrupted when I saw the news about Jared Golden's decision last week while we were interviewing Democratic candidates. Keeping in the Northeast, New York Representative Elise Stefanik made her long anticipated run for governor official. The Republican from North Country was supposed to be Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, but saw her nomination pulled over concerns that Democrats could actually flip her district in a special election, despite Trump having won it by 20 points in the 2024 race. Now she faces, assuming she's the GOP nominee, an uphill climb against Governor Kathy Hochul in next year's midterm elections.
Moving slightly west, Democratic Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia made a surprise decision not to seek re-election to his district in Illinois. That allowed his chief of staff, Patty Garcia, to be the only Democrat to file to run in this district next year. This situation is the reason why some states, including Nebraska, have separate filing deadlines for incumbents and non-incumbent candidates, so that office holders can't just back out at the last second and happen to have their chosen replacement ready there to file. This race is solid Democratic, but just an interesting tidbit that honestly gets me a little bit annoyed.
Yeah. Some states also have rules where if the incumbent doesn't file, it extends the filing deadline. But this is not the first time in Illinois this has happened. Dan Lipinski, who is one of the more conservative members of the delegation, of the Democratic delegation, got his seat because his father, who held the seat before him, pulled this same stunt, waited until the last minute not to file, and Dan was able to take over his seat. Continuing our trek westward all the way to the West Coast. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that she would not seek re-election to California's 11th district, signaling an end to a history-making career that spanned more than 40 years. The first and only woman ever to serve as Speaker of the House of Representatives, Pelosi oversaw the passage of the Affordable Care Act, Dodd-Frank, and the economic stimulus during the Obama administration, and later emerged as Trump's chief antagonist during his first term when he was impeached twice. Her retirement intensifies a primary that had already gotten going. State Senator Scott Wiener has wanted this seat for a very long time, has actually filed and fundraised for it before. He is in the race. So is the former chief of staff to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez named Saikat Chakrabarti, who is also a wealthy tech investor. He's in that race too, but more people are going to jump in. One person who's not going to run, speaking of candidates who follow their parents' footsteps, is Christine Pelosi, who had long been rumored to have her eyes on this seat. She is running instead for Scott Wiener's state Senate seat.
I'll never forget a flight where I sat next to Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco back to DC. And it was probably one of many cycles where, and I was writing the newsletter and writing about how Republicans were trying to use her as a liability against Democratic candidates. I'm like, is she looking over my shoulder? Is she looking at my screen? Like, well, while I'm writing this, but those were, it's an end of an era, truly an end of an era.
I want to welcome back to the show our return guest, special guest, Leah Askarinam of the Associated Press. She is an alumna of National Journal's Hotline, the New York Times, and most importantly of Inside Elections with Nathan Gonzales. Leah, it is so good to see you.
It is so great to be here.
Now, we know from your previous appearances on the show that you grew up in Maryland's 8th District, making us a Maryland 8 majority show today, and fulfilling the requirement that there always must be someone from Montgomery County associated with the Stuart Rothenberg political report or Inside Elections. But tell us, because we already know where you grew up, where you went to college, what congressional district?
So this is where I need potentially a phone a friend, Jacob, because we were just trying to figure out so I went to Tulane in New Orleans, and depending on where I lived, I think I had a slightly different congressional district. So when I looked at the campus, the representative is Steve Scalise, the Uptown campus in New Orleans. But when I looked up where I lived later, my representative was Troy Carter. So congressional districts, weird is the takeaway from that. So
coincidentally, I happen to have the lines of the Louisiana
goodness.
Maps on my phone. Just
always
so
on
happens
standby.
It's actually my lock screen is a zoomed in New Orleans looking at the congressional
Crazily,
maps.
I'm not surprised, which is what's also strange. But go ahead.
And Steve Scalise's district has a little bit of New Orleans. It has Metairie up kind of to the northwest, but then it kind of scoops down into the city a little bit, and it goes all the way up to Fontainebleau Drive. There's a little kind of tendril or arm that goes along Broadway Street up to Fontainebleau and then down Jefferson. So
that's Tulane. That is Tulane,
and Loyola is like a little carve out here. So that is why Steve Scalise is the congressman for Tulane, even though Troy Carter in Louisiana too represents the rest of New Orleans. Scalise's district jumps the lake. If you'll see, there's a non-contiguous
let me see
section.
The picture. Okay.
We need to upgrade our graphics here.
Exactly. There's a non-contiguous section of the first congressional district that kind of hops Lake Pontchartrain.
And this is one of the many questions that I'm glad we're going into this now, because this will be an issue before 2026, I'd imagine, where the congressional lines start and end in Louisiana, specifically around New Orleans. So it's
Yeah.
it's squiggly.
CNN projects that former Democratic Congresswoman and CIA case officer Abigail Spanberger will be elected the governor of Virginia, defeating the Commonwealth's sitting lieutenant governor, Republican Winsome Earl Sears.
We are ready to project that Mikey Sherrill will be the next governor of New Jersey.
So let's talk about this ballot measure, Prop 50. NBC News now projecting it has passed.
Democrats are declaring victory in two statewide races that directly affect your wallet. The party says it flipped 2 seats on Georgia's Public Service Commission.
NBC News can project at this hour that the winner of the New York City mayoral race will be Zohran Mamdani.
We are coming off of a big election week in America. It is an odd-numbered year, so you know what that means. We had elections in Virginia and New Jersey, but we also saw a massive ballot measure referendum in California, the New York mayoral race, and a whole host of local elections all across the country, in Pennsylvania, in New York as well, in Mississippi. A lot of election results to dig into on a good night for Democrats. Of course, we saw Democrats flip the Virginia gubernatorial mansion as well as the 2 down ballot races there for lieutenant governor and attorney general. We saw Democrats maintain the New Jersey governor's race and increase their margins in the state legislature there. Democrat Zohran Mamdani, of course, won the New York mayoral race over Andrew Cuomo, another Democrat running as an independent. And in California, it was a walkover for the ballot measure redrawing the California congressional map in such a way that should help Democrats flip between 3 and 5 seats next year. So a very good night for Democrats overall. Let's go around and just share a few of our personal big takeaways from the results last week. Nathan, we'll kick it off with you.
Wow, I get to start. Okay. I think what stuck out to me was the breadth and the depth of the Democratic victories, meaning that I think if you're a Republican, you could try to explain away 1, 2, or 3 of the elections. You could blame a candidate, you could blame circumstances, whatever it might be. But when you look at the victories, the margins in Virginia and New Jersey, the margins in Georgia for those 2 Public Service Commission races, the margins in California, I think you see a pretty sweeping Democratic victory. It almost felt like 2024 in reverse, meaning 2024 as the elections were coming in, you felt like Republicans, it was all good news for Republicans, right? You were really stretching to find what are the pieces of good news. And the piece of good news for Republicans might have been the race where their candidate got 8% of the vote, and that was the New York City mayoral race. And that could be good news for Republicans because they're going to try to elevate Mayor Mamdani, make him the head of the Democratic Party, moving into these next elections.
Yeah, Leah, what were your takeaways?
Just building off of that, how much easier it is to be a big tent party when you are not in the majority, when you are the opposition party. So while, having both Mamdani and Abigail Spanberger seen as big winners in a year where Democratic president was in the White House, I think that would have been a much harder feat. But since it's kind of it's against, people are voting for their candidate, so you do have people who really like Mamdani, people are voting against the status quo, whatever that is, which is egg prices, and you have people who are voting against Trump. So it's kind of a perfect storm until you start legislating. And that's, we can go full circle there and talk about the shutdown shortly. But, that I think it's basically the same as Nathan's, just from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, no, clearly, I think a big theme here is the winning solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
If you're winning, it is much easier to get along with the other people in your party. That's how you end up with, AOC writing fundraising emails for Abigail Spanberger, which is not something that, is necessarily intuitive, but a rising tide certainly lifts all boats. I think that my big takeaway is that Republicans continue to struggle with turning out voters when Trump is not on the ticket. And if this is a problem that they cannot fix, they're in for a very difficult time in the midterm elections. That's just the reality of it. And, these results are obviously a mixture of turnout and persuasion, but you don't get a 20-point Democratic win in Georgia, for instance, without a lot of your own voters staying home. I mean, there were counties in Georgia that haven't voted for a Democrat since, Zell Miller, who, were voting for these kind of obscure public service commissioner races. So, Republicans have a real challenge on their hands. At the end of it, it's kind of got lost in the sweep of the final pre-election day stories. There was a story, I want to say in Axios, I think, Leah, your friend Mark Caputo wrote about how the Trump machine was starting to pour in millions of dollars into turnout operations in Virginia and New Jersey to activate their coalition. I don't know if that money ever actually materialized, but I think it was an interesting kind of, hedge against winning. I think if anyone had won in Virginia or New Jersey, we would have heard a lot about how the Trump campaign came in to save the day after the fact. But I just think this is a problem that Republicans have, and it's unclear whether Trump, with his $1 billion of political money stashed away, is able or willing to help Republicans correct it.
And the other piece of good news for Democrats is that independent voters, right? Independent voters flipping from Trump to either Spanberger or Sherrill, or just Democratic candidates improving in general among independent voters. Because the magic equation for a great political year, I hesitate to use the word wave, but it's when your turnout is high, when independent voters flip to your side, and the other turnout for the other party is low. And I think that we saw a little bit of that equation this cycle. I don't think Republican turnout was dismal, but that combination of high Democratic turnout, independents flipping, led to these not only victories but big margins.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's like what Jacob was saying, this shouldn't be surprising that when Trump is on the ballot, and given the state of things, Trump himself saying the government shutdown, according to capital P pollsters, are the reason why the Democrats did so well in the midterms. What was it? He said the shutdown and
I'm not on the ballot, or Trump not on the ballot.
I mean, that's analysis. And I think we're kind of repeating some of that. But that I think there's kind of been a feeling where Democrats feel lost in the wilderness. And I think that's probably gotten some pickup in political analysis worlds when historical trends still tend to rule the day. And the historical trends now are, this is not Trump's first off-year election. So while, it makes sense that people might have been surprised by this in 2017 or 2018. We've done this before. Trump has been president before. And when Trump is not on the ballot, it is difficult to turn out Republicans. Not so different from Democrats' challenge when Obama was the president.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. This coalition, I feel like when I try to bring up this very point, that it comes off as, well, you just don't like Trump. You're just saying that because it's Trump. No, we've seen this. We've seen the Democratic Party struggle to turn out the Obama coalition when Obama wasn't on the ballot. Right? This dynamic is a bipartisan dynamic that we've seen.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. It has gone less remarked upon because it's obviously one small part of the overall election picture that happened. But as we're talking about how good a night Democrats had all across the map, I think the one place where Republicans held strong, Nassau County, New York, on Long Island. This is a county that has emerged as kind of a swing county. Biden won it in 2020. It swung to Trump in 2024, and Republicans won up and down the ballot there. They won all 3 countywide offices, and they won a lot of the town races that were going on. And you might say, okay, well, this is, just one county. But I do think that it's worth pointing out, especially as we're looking at the battle for the House, right? You've got 2 highly competitive House districts in Nassau County, both held by Democrats. New York's 3rd and 4th districts, Tom Suozzi and Laura Gillen. Further out on Long Island, you've got 2 more House districts that Democrats sometimes think that they can target. The 1st district, Nick LaLota, the 2nd district, Andrew Garbarino. I think that it's interesting. I would be curious to know kind of what happened out there, such that Republicans were able to buck the trend and put up double-digit wins across the board in this very populous swing area, even as the party was falling flat on its face everywhere else that elections were taking place. So,
yeah, I think one of the most interesting political developments of the last 4 years has been how much House Republicans have had to rely on New York to pass their agenda and to have a majority. Because, without, like you said, LaLota, Lawler, a handful of others like this, Democrats have the majority. And so you have a Republican conference that on one hand has, Steve Scalise, my potentially former congressman, we think we figured that out. On one side, and on the other side, you have, people who are representing urban areas and are partnering with kind of more moderate members. So it's interesting.
A lot of the conversation, even around redistricting, has, to my ear, not included appropriate context about historical midterm trends. And this is something that we get asked about a lot as Republicans have embarked on a very aggressive gerrymandering mid-decade redistricting campaign in Texas and Missouri and North Carolina and potentially Indiana as well, maybe Florida. Is what additional boost does it give them for the fight for the House? And my answer has always been that if this is anything like a typical midterm cycle, it will not be nearly enough. That Democrats at baseline need to flip 3 districts, right? They, assuming everything was the same, they would have to flip 3 seats. Republicans could make it so that they, in reality, have to flip maybe 12 seats, 12, 13, 14, something like that. On average, the party out of power in a midterm election flips 29 seats. So if this is an average midterm, does it affect the majority margin, right? Does it affect the size of a Democratic majority? Absolutely. Sure. Does that matter a lot? Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of the task, you can't redraw your way out of a wave election, out of a midterm level backlash. Potentially, right, Leah, you mentioned the Voting Rights Act and the Supreme Court. Like, that's something that I think could be a big enough kind of exogenous shock that reordered the system to change the calculation a little bit. But even then, could you get 20 seats out of striking down the VRA? I don't think so. And so it's still difficult to see a preventing majority swing if the national environment looks like next year what it looked like last Tuesday.
Right. And we should keep in mind, like, 2022 was a weird election.
Sure.
So it's not like, if we're looking at historical trends, recently we've had some weird elections.
Yeah.
So, we can use that as a data point in there. But ultimately, I think the conversation, you guys talk to Democrats and Republicans all the time, strategists all the time. like, did Democrats who you spoke to before Tuesday, did they think things were going to go this well for them? Like, were they expecting a Spanberger margin of, upwards of a dozen points, or for Democrats to pick up, how many seats did they pick up in the House of Delegates? Like,
I think 13 or
almost,
14.
yeah, upwards of a dozen. Were they expecting that? Because I do feel like there's just been such a Democratic gloom that's also kind of colored it's like there's been a Democratic gloom and a Republican kind of elation at the same time, like they, trying to pass an agenda with all three, the presidency, the House, and the Senate, all controlled by Republicans and really controlled by, Donald Trump's influence in all of that. That I do wonder if that kind of colored the way that we went into this election. Like, should we have seen this kind of wave building?
I felt like there was a cautious optimism, but the surprises would have been Mikey Sherrill's margin from a low to mid single digit race to end up being 14. I mean, the Spanberger and Sherrill's margins are going to be very similar. It looks like when everything is counted. I'm not sure anyone was really expecting that. Jay Jones' victory in the state attorney general race, it looked like he was running neck and neck, but clearly behind Spanberger, which he did run behind Spanberger, but that was not a squeaker of a race. And so those were the extra surprises. I was not talking to people handicapping the Public Service Commission races in Georgia. And I'm not sure if a lot of people here in DC were paying attention to that, but those were pleasant surprises.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and those races are certainly lower profile than some of these other ones, but they speak to, I think, because they're lower profile, they speak to the national environment, perhaps the underlying national environment a little bit more, right? In Virginia, you had candidate quality stuff. You had a massive spending advantage for Democrats. You had the shutdown and Doge and the rifts and everything playing out in Northern Virginia and the Hampton Roads region. There were a lot of specific factors. Georgia, you didn't have those. These were not races attracting tens of millions of dollars in spending. And there was some coverage. I think the Republicans were concerned, hey, there's a mayoral race in Atlanta. There are some Atlanta things that are going on that are going to drive turnout there. Maybe that'll, could that cause us to lose these races? Maybe. I don't think anyone was anticipating the kind of statewide shift that we ended up seeing, right? You don't get to a 20-point win in Georgia. These are the first Democrats to win a statewide election in Georgia in 20 years. Hasn't happened since 2006. You don't get to that kind of win without something being in the water in the national environment that is propelling Democrats forward. So no, I think that the results exceeded the expectations across the board here. And that was a big part of why we saw so much jubilation from the Democratic Party in the days following the election.
All right. You two tell me whether I'm wrong here, whether I'm right or wrong, that the House majority was in play before these elections, certainly in play after, but the United States Senate was a reach for Democrats before these elections, and I will say still a reach for Democrats after. I don't know that these results told us that Democrats can march into Iowa, Texas, Alaska, and win those Senate seats necessary, or Ohio, to get to the majority. Am I right? Am I right or wrong on the Senate?
I do think that it shows the potential for overperformance in places like Iowa. So I'd imagine that this is going to help with fundraising. And, if you have a strong candidate someplace, all you need is the other candidate to, really drop the ball and, a huge national wave and a bunch of other things. But perfect storm could happen. I can imagine this would encourage Democrats to invest in and recruit in some of these races. I think the conversation that's about to happen about what kind of candidate that should be is messier than ever after the other night when we saw Mamdani win, we saw in Minneapolis, we saw the incumbent mayor win against a Democratic socialist. What are people going to do with that? And I know it's not apples to apples. It's not even like apples to oranges. It's really like two completely different races.
Apples to school buses.
Kind of apples to school buses. It's like if New York is the apple, Minneapolis is, I guess, the school bus. I think it shows the path. Now, what's the probability of that path being the one taken? That is not something I do for a living, thank goodness. But it's in there, right?
I think there are two components to a Democratic Senate majority. There's the structural component and there's the environment component. And the structural component is static. It does not change. And the structural component is what makes this such a reach for Democrats, right? Because the way that they have to win back the Senate majority is winning 2 states that are very evenly divided or slightly Democratic in Maine and North Carolina, but have been very difficult for Democrats to win at the Senate level for quite some time. And then they have to win, it's a pick 2 of a bunch of states that are not very Republican, but have a pronounced Republican lean out of Iowa, Texas, Ohio, and Alaska. And that has not changed, right? Like the Senate map is still the same as it was on Monday a week ago as it is on Monday today. But I do think that the second component in terms of the national environment is one that you have to be heartened if you're a Democrat looking at last week's results, because we saw essentially about a 9-point swing in terms of the margin in both Virginia and New Jersey, states that Harris won by between 5 and 6 points, that voted for the Democratic candidate for governor by around 15 points. And you take that and this is too reductive and not at all nuanced, but you apply that to the margin in Iowa and in Texas in the Senate race and in Ohio and in Alaska, and you get something that looks a lot like a really close contest. So I think that this is a necessary but not sufficient piece to the Democrats reclaiming the majority. I think, Leah, your point about fundraising, candidate recruitment, to the extent that that's still going on, is incredibly important. This is a shot in the arm for Democrats who are staring down a very difficult Senate map. But absolutely, I mean, I think you have to be more confident in Democrats' ability to, draw the inside straight and flip the Senate now than you would have been before we knew what the election results were.
And I think the caveat to that is Susan Collins.
Sure.
Like, that's where it's like, I don't know. Like, if eventually, there are members who are safe forever until they're not. We can go through the list. But that seems like that's a tougher one. That's a tougher one, I think, to handicap, because it's so dependent on the incumbent and her strength. Though eventually candidate strength, I mean, Mary Landrieu, Claire McCaskill, I can't, whatever.
John Tester, Sherrod Brown.
Sherrod Brown. The guy in Minnesota who was there since 1990, the House.
Colin Peterson.
Colin Peterson I feel like nobody talks about Colin Peterson anymore.
I speak for yourself. I talk about Colin Peterson all the time.
With this in your Louisiana map on your phone, those are constants in your life.
But really, it just took one election for this Trump district Democrat who's been there since 1990, to lose. So that's what makes it exciting. And
no.
Well, if we look even further ahead to 2028, here's my question for the two of you. Who is most likely to be a part of the Democratic presidential ticket. So 2 slots on that ticket. Who is most likely out of incoming Governor Abigail Spanberger, incoming Governor Mikey Sherrill, or almost outgoing Governor Gavin Newsom? Who is most likely to be a part of the Democratic ticket in 2028?
I'm not going first on this one, though I have my answer. I've had the same answer on this for about 3 years. So that probably tells you what I think.
I think of those 3, Gavin Newsom is the likeliest to appear on a ticket for 2 reasons. One, I think that he starts in a much stronger position in terms of name ID among Democratic primary voters, fundraising capacity, the whole shebang. And because he is the outgoing governor, this is his and he got his Prop 50 passed. Like, this is the focus now for him. And he's very obviously running for president. Cheryl is just going to take office, and she can run for re-election in New Jersey. You know, they get 2 terms over there. I'm not sure that she's going to run for president. And Spanberger, you know, I think is an interesting case there. You know, expanding it to the full ticket makes it a little bit more interesting in my mind, because I think that Spanberger or Sherrill are possible VP picks in a way that I don't think that Gavin Newsom would ever be somebody else's VP. I don't think that he would take that job. And maybe I'm wrong. He's, you know, hung around as Jerry Brown's lieutenant governor for 8 years with the anticipation of running for governor. But I just don't know if he's has the humility in him to take the VP slot to somebody who will have beaten him in the Democratic primary.
Okay. I agree that it's Gavin Newsom, most likely, in like the most obvious way, right? Like, it's just like, and he in a sense had the biggest victory of the night, right? Like 30 points, something like that margin in the California ballot measure that, you know, he took the reins in campaigning on that, and, you know, at one point said, like, you know, don't donate anymore because we have enough money, and we're like, which is a sign that like he was pretty confident that they were going to win. So that, putting that out there. So objectively, it's been the case for several years now that I think Gavin Newsom is in the presidential conversation. Abigail Spanberger has been in a much different presidential conversation. And I feel like Nathan probably has heard these kinds of same things over the years, where it was like the second she was recruited as a House candidate, I just remember murmurs for years of her being the kind of candidate who will have national, I don't even know national aspirations, but who could be really successful nationally. And I can see her being recruited. I don't know if we have much precedent for, you know, a new governor, a female governor, being on a presidential ticket when she hasn't even finished her term in, you know, as governor. So that's why you can't really bet on that, because it's just you shouldn't bet. But like, that's why, you know, that's why she's not first. It's just something that we haven't seen before, and we're really big on historical trends here. But she's just been, you know, her name has been floating around for years in very like nerdy circles, and I wouldn't be surprised if she was recruited for higher office.
Well, Nathan, Leah, you're talking about the rumor mill, and who people, shadowy figures in the background continue to float Abigail Spanberger for governor. Well, I'm excited to say we have one of those shadowy figures for president.
I wasn't recruiting her. I have been floating her as someone to watch, I will admit.
Because strategists behind the scenes have also been, I mean, floating her name as someone to watch for years. And I will say Nathan was when we did our candidate interview with Jared Golden in 2018, Nathan was like, that's a strong candidate. And I was like, really? Just kind of like a guy. I don't know. And clearly Nathan was spot on that one. So your instincts are good.
Usually, hopefully, sometimes.
Leah, I will raise you. I don't think that any woman who has served as a governor has ever run for president. Now, the nerds who listen to this show can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm looking at a list of every woman to serve as governor in American history, and I don't think that anyone's even run. Sarah Palin obviously runs for VP, but I don't think that anyone has actually ever run for president before.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, that would be a pretty easy fact check, but because there have only been so many female governors. But if that's what that sounds right. VP, I'm more curious about, like how many have but I don't know.
I think that Palin is the only woman to be a Republican VP candidate. Obviously, Al Gore should have picked Jeanne Shaheen in 2000 and won New Hampshire and been president. And Obama supposedly considered, I believe, both Janet Napolitano and Kathleen Sebelius in 2008. And, Harris considered Gretchen Whitmer in 2024. But I think that's about it.
Yeah, and I mean, and Cheryl also, like, third option there. I think she was, underestimated for this race, or at least for her New Jersey governor's race. So, keep that in mind. She's been underestimated. She won by a larger margin than I think a lot of the prognosticators were expecting, and she did.
Calling us out on our own podcast, Leah.
Brutal.
You guys aren't prognosticators, you're analysts. I was very careful to use the word prognosticator.
I think we're there. That's all right. Well, we forgive you. You're a friend and an alum. What I'll go with, to be the contrarian, going back to the original question, I'll stick with Spanberger. I think Newsom has done a good job of elevating himself and embodying, I think, the spirit of what a lot of Democrats want to see in opposition to Trump, even if Trump is not running in 2028. And Spanberger, I do think that there's still a desire on the Democratic side to continue to elevate women or candidates of color or people like that, even though the 2024 election did not turn out how most Democrats want. Now, I was surprised that one of the lessons that maybe 8 Democrats learned from this last week was that the elections were assigned to give in to Republicans on the Hill and vote to get rid of the shutdown. But I guess that's where we are. We're recording on Monday, where the Senate has voted to end the shutdown. We'll see what ends up happening with the House. But what do you two think about that vote and how it could impact the 2026 elections?
Yeah, I'm curious what they table. Right? Like, it seems like there's going to be another vote on the Obamacare subsidies. Is there a chance that Congress will have to take another intense vote in November of 2026? Because if so, sure, this could have an impact on it. But I think in general, the shutdown's been going on for like a very long time. Understatement, over 40 days. And if anything, going back to what we were talking about with kind of the mood of Democrats being kind of despondent up until this moment nationally, I do wonder if some of the kind of jubilation from the Tuesday night results could take some of the, pressure, online pressure, off of the Senate. But like, that's speculation, and that's also very vibes based. Yeah.
No, I think as the resident 2 online member of this podcast, I would say that if anything, it has compounded the rage.
Oh, okay.
Because I think everyone who was watching the results from last week is now even more confused as to why Democrats would pick this moment to cave when they seem to have more momentum than they have in a very long time. I don't think that has blunted the frustration. I think it has intensified it.
I wonder if there's an easier time, like if Democrats are not going to quote unquote cave now, when do they expect, like, what is a better situation that Democrats will end up in down the line? Like, what will they be able to get in the next several weeks that they have not been able to get in the last 40 days? And so in that sense, I wonder, like, even if it's seen as caving, like maybe the response can be a little bit cushioned, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that certainly it from a base perspective, from a party management perspective, it's better for them that they did it now than if they had taken this deal on October 1st, which is essentially they didn't get anything, right? Like they got a commitment to hold a vote in the Senate. We'll see if that vote even happens. It's not going to pass. It's never going to come up in the House. And it was on offer from the beginning. And they got an agreement to reinstate the workers who were riffed during the shutdown. But if we go back in time to October 1st, all that they have gotten is a commitment for a vote in the Senate that won't pass. And they could have had that at any point in time. But if they had folded on day one, I think that would have enraged the party even more than it has now. But I think the alternative here is an incredibly uncomfortable one, which is that if they had not folded now and we had gone to Thanksgiving with government workers missing 2 months worth of paychecks, flights in disarray, the FAA was canceling, has been canceling 10% and increasing amounts of flights every single day, essentially telling airlines you have to start decimating your flights because we don't have enough air traffic controllers. I think that the alternative here is an infliction of even more pain to increase the political pressure to get Republicans to come to a deal, or nuke the filibuster and own that as well. But that's the only other off ramp here that seems to be reasonable, because I think it was pretty clear that Republicans are never going to extend these subsidies. That's just, I just don't think that it's going to happen. And, to your point, that could well be a defining issue of the 2026 midterms. And I think that there's an argument that politically it's incredibly short-sighted what Republicans are doing, and that this is going to come back and bite them long after voters forget their anger about the Democratic shutdown, or the Democrats caving on the shutdown or starting the however you want to frame it. But I don't think Republicans have any sort of interest in doing anything to prop up the system held by Obamacare, even if it means increasing premiums for tens of millions of Americans.
Yeah, if the subsidies lapse and rates go up, it is very difficult for Republicans to not address that issue or not be held responsible for it, right? Based on this framing, how this narrative in this agreement has played out. But I think it's important to remember, because I hear the Republican jubilation about the outrage on the Democratic side toward these 8 senators who went across the aisle to vote for this bill. But we remember not that long ago where a divided party still did well in the general election, going back to 2010 with the Tea Party movement, and the Republican establishment was under attack, was under siege from the Tea Party, and Eric Cantor was losing election. And there was this whole civil war on the Republican side in the same time that in that general election, Republicans gained 63 seats in the House. Like, just because the Democratic base is mad, that doesn't mean they're not going to vote in the general election. And I'll say, when they vote in the general election, they ain't going to vote for Republicans. Right? That's not the solution to their problems. So 2 things can be happening at the same time: a Democratic civil war and Democrats doing well in a general election.
Yeah, one person's divided party is somebody else's big tent. And actually, you could just say that whenever the party in opposition or in the minority is divided, it is a big tent. If they're, second they start legislating, that's the Civil War.
Can we just establish, though, that Chuck Schumer is not up for election this cycle, and the idea that AOC is going to challenge him, she may in 2028, but he's not up for election this year, and neither are, and 6 of the senators who voted are not up for voting for the bill, are not up for election. 2 of them have decided not to run for re-election, so there's not any electoral consequence for the senators who just voted for this.
Not immediately. I do think. I don't know what Schumer is going to do in 2028. He's getting up there in age. It probably depends on, in part, if Democrats reclaim the majority in 2026. I don't think that anything that he has done in his time as majority leader has made his path to re-election any easier. I think that 2028, if I had to wager, will be Chuck Schumer's most difficult re-election if he chooses to run again. I think he will face a legitimate primary challenger from the left, whether it's AOC or somebody else. I think, that's something that only she knows. And whether it's successful or not, I don't think that's something that anybody knows, but I do think that it will happen, and it'll happen in a way that he has not had to deal with before. I do also think that we might see somebody run against him as leader next time. And again, that probably depends, if Democrats take back the Senate, it will be everyone who is in that chamber will be indebted to Chuck Schumer and the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars that he will raise into the various super PACs that help Democrats get across the finish line there. So that might be, that might grease the wheels for him a little bit. If Democrats lose seats or certainly don't gain seats or lose winnable races, I would not be surprised if we see a viable challenge to Schumer again. Don't know who it would be. Don't think that it would win just because it's hard to beat a Senate, leader. You need a majority of your own conference. You don't need to do a floor vote like they do in the House. But I think that there will be consequences for him down the line, even if he's not up for election this time. And I think that it'll make life more difficult for the candidates who are associated with him in their primaries in 2026, because I think that he is sticking a finger in the eye of the base at the moment, right there. You can't avoid that. And so if you're Janet Mills in Maine, if you're Haley Stevens to a lesser extent in Michigan, if you're Josh Turek in Iowa, those are the big Senate primaries currently, and I think Texas is like a different situation because neither of those candidates are like clearly the Schumer candidate. But I think it's going to be difficult, it's going to be tricky for those candidates to navigate the coming weeks and months as Senate leadership in DC is doing unpopular things.
And as Mom Donnie, takes a national tour, I know, whatever. Like, which one would you rather campaign with, Mom Donnie or Schumer?
Yeah, and I try to when we're talking about Mom Donnie and him becoming, a bigger figure on the stage and Republicans trying to make him that figure, I try to let's think about 2027, 2028, or even beyond. Will we look back at the 2026 midterm elections and say, wow, those elections were defined by who the mayor of New York City, it was at the time?
No.
Unlikely.
No, I've been really careful this whole podcast, but no, that's not what's
it doesn't help. It does fit into the narrative that Democrats are trying to, the hole or the ditch that Democrats are trying to dig out of. But you're right. It is unlikely. I'll say unlikely. You say no.
I just say no. It's the New York mayor's race. It's against Andrew Cuomo. What are we? The last mayor was Eric Adams, which I guess you could kind of say, I know we kind of looked at that and we're like, oh, that's a sign that Democrats, are going to be more, they want more of a police presence, which I guess wasn't false. It was just who goes back and it's yeah, that's the Eric Adams midterm. No.
With all the Pelosi news, I've been thinking a bit about this because I think it's pretty obvious that, what they're trying to do with Mamdani, what the Republicans are trying to do with Mamdani is run the Pelosi playbook against House Democrats, which is take every single House Democrat and associate them with somebody who is further to the left than the country as a whole and try and, imbue a guilt by association And we saw that for 20 years. That has been the Republican playbook with Pelosi. Here's this San Francisco super liberal, unpopular figure at the top of the Democratic Party that she'll be speaker if you vote for this House candidate. This House candidate is a Pelosi Democrat. This House candidate is backed by Pelosi. And some years it worked, the years where Republicans were already going to win. And some years, like 2018, it didn't work because good candidates were able to distinguish themselves from somebody who was going to be Speaker of the House, right? You had a candidate like Abigail Spanberger, who you may have heard of, who at that debate, right, in 2018, I went back and watched that debate this week between her and David Bratt, and Bratt kept on tying her back to Pelosi. And Spanberger had this phenomenal closing moment in the debate where she said, my opponent keeps trying to tell you that I'm Nancy Pelosi. I'm not Nancy Pelosi. Abigail Spanberger is my name. And that was kind of how she ended her, there was some other stuff in the middle there, but it was like, and that was against a House member, the Democratic leader of the House who had universal name ID. Mamdani is not in the House. And he doesn't have universal name ID. So I think it's going to be even more difficult for Republicans to turn Mamdani into a boogeyman than it has been for them to turn Pelosi into a boogeyman, boogie woman. I don't know if it's a gender term.
I think that's I was actually just about to say like the same thing. I was like boogeyman or boogie woman, but where we are now, and that this is different from where I think a lot of analysis, was a week or two ago, it's kind of like everyone took a deep breath and it's like, we're going into a midterm. We're seeing Republicans search for a boogeyman to replace Nancy Pelosi like they did last time. It's like just getting back to these, like, who's a national figure that Republicans can tie to Democrats and to kind of poison the water for them. Where are we going to see like highest turnout? Like we're just getting back to, this is a midterm election. Yes, things are weird right now. The world feels a little upside down, but there's still there is some consistency in midterms with, again, the added caveat of Voting Rights Act and a lot of redistricting. But for talking about dynamics, we could have had this exact same conversation in 2022, in 2018. It's like we have now all, I think, accepted that this is the election year has begun and it is an American midterm election.
And everyone should tune in to the Inside Elections podcast and subscribe to Inside Elections to guide you along the way.
Now it's time for our final segment. Look what I found. This is when we talk about anything that we've discovered or enjoyed over the past week. It does not have to be political. It's encouraged that it not be political. It could be a movie, a TV show, a nice meal that you went out at a restaurant over the past couple weeks. You never know what you're going to get. Nathan, we'll kick it off with you. What did you find this week?
I found that the number 6 ranked Dallas Dragons defeated the Milwaukee Mustangs 45-6 in the first round of the 5A Oregon high school football playoffs. The Dragons are in Oregon's sixth district. Now they're going to play the quarterfinal game against number 3 Mountain View, which is in Bend in Central Oregon in Oregon's 5th district. It's going to be a big, tough matchup, but I have to say, go Dragons. I got some merch here, some swag just to represent the cause. I know you all are gripped by this. I can feel the energy.
Now I'm just wondering how many cities are there in Oregon that are just like the lesser known versions of larger American cities out. Like is there like a Baltimore, Oregon that who's the mayor of New York City, Oregon?
That is good. I see where you're Dallas, Milwaukee. I don't know. There is a Boring, Oregon, not too far outside of Portland, not a major city, but kind of a fun name. There's I think there's a Springfield. There's a Springfield in every state,
has
right?
A Springfield,
everyone
yeah.
has a Springfield. So I don't know. Stay tuned. Hopefully there will be more Dallas Dragons updates as they continue on in the playoffs. That's why people tune into this podcast. But I don't know, Jacob, what did you find?
So I also found a playoff win. I was in attendance at the Washington Spirit quarterfinal game this past Saturday. The Spirit defeated Racing Louisville in a thrilling match that went to penalty kicks. I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time. The Spirit got off to they were dominant the entire game, but they could not find the back of the net. They had a goal overturned by VAR, the bad kind of VAR, as opposed to the good kind of inside elections VAR. They had a goal overturned. They finally scored in the 73rd minute. We were like, all right, just got to get through the last couple minutes of this game. And then Louisville scored in stoppage time, which was a heartbreaker. And then they went into overtime. Still more opportunities, a couple of missed opportunities there for both teams. And then they went to penalty kicks. The place was, on the edge of their seat, and the Spirit advanced 3-1 on penalties. So it was very exciting. They play Portland this coming Saturday. If they win that game, they go to the NWSL Championships in San Jose, California on November 22nd.
All right, and I've got one that's not sports, shockingly.
Is it dancing?
It's dancing. Sorry.
We'll have to tell that story another time.
We cannot tell that story.
Speaking of other election results from 20...
Nope. All right. We're going to talk about James Garfield. Well, okay. Well, kind of. The new Netflix show, Death by Lightning, based on Destiny Republic by Candace Millard, which Jacob and I have spoken on many a podcast, finally is out. I have not found the right moment to sit down and enjoy it. And I think it's going to have to be have you started it, Jacob?
I have not yet, no.
Yeah, so we're going to have to figure out a way where we both press play at the exact same moment so we can discuss after. But I also don't want to watch it with anyone else around because I don't want to be talking. So I've got to be completely tuned in. And then I want to hear all of the hot takes on what's factually inaccurate or accurate or just cool.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
I love how you didn't even ask me if I had started it yet. You just assumed you knew that I was not going to be participating in this.
Jacob and I have spoken about James Garfield at length. You and I have not spoken about James Garfield at length.
It's true. It's true.
Okay. There are other TV shows.
We don't have that bond.
No. This. I knew he would know. Yeah. But yes, excited to see if anyone else has been watching. No spoilers.
No spoilers. Yeah, I won't tell you how it ends.
That's going to be a bummer.
Awesome. Well, Leah, thank you for joining us. We didn't even mention your good and hard work on the decision desk for the Associated Press. Most people probably don't even know that so many media outlets rely on the Associated Press and their work on election nights, calling races, calling, which candidate is going to win. And Leah is an integral part of that. So, Leah, thank you for your hard work and for being a friend of the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Colin Peterson. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and associate producer Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.